Was there a point where you're like, I really hope Ed can sing, because otherwise this could sink my film?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Strap in, here we go.
Yeah. Tell me,
I have some notes.
Tear it apart. Hold on to your butts. Netflix want both films.
Alrighty. Welcome, Eddie Sternberg.
How you doing?
Woo! Thank you. Okay. Eddie Sternberg, he made the film I Used to Be Famous. Also from the short film, I Used to Be Famous. Thank you for being here today, Eddie Sternberg.
Pleasure to be here.
Excellent.
Please be gentle.
So, I'm curious because you've been through, multiple short films and, you've been writing a long time, obviously. What was it about I Used to Be Famous where you were like, this is the one that I'm going to try and stake all my claim on? Like, this is the one that I'm going to go for?
It was the moment that the idea first popped into my head. It was like the character of Vince. I was sat in the Prince Charles Cinema. Really busy work day, clearly. It was in the middle of the day. And I was watching Francis Ha, the Noah Baumbach film. And I was enjoying it up to a point. And then suddenly, I don't know where it came from. I think it was because at the time, there were quite a lot of former pop stars, in the press. They were sort of coming back. There were like reunion shows and articles in the press about all these pop stars that were sort of reforming. And it just hit me the idea of Vince, this former pop star walking around Peckham with a makeshift kind of set up with his keyboard and his ironing board, tragically walking around trying to score a gig, basically. That was the spark, and then from there it was like, this has to be the thing that was all my focus went on to that, basically.
Well, I'm curious because whenever I go to any of those like screenwriting lessons and whatnot, they always, one of the golden rules they all seem to talk about is, write about what you know. And as far as my internet research has gone, I don't think that you've been a former boy band member or whatnot.
I not through want of trying. It's interesting. The write about what you know thing, I've kind of come to terms with the idea that it's about, it doesn't mean that you can only write and direct and act in stories that you've experienced. I think it's more, there needs to be the truth in whatever it is that you're working on, so Vince could be a former pop star, which I wasn't, unfortunately. I think with his intentions and his wants and needs, I think if everything is kind of worked on with an authenticness and a authenticity and a truthness to it, truthfulness, whatever, I think that's where that idea comes from in terms of write about what you know. The themes. The themes. The themes are quite universal, I think.
So then, when you're going to write, are you just like basically just pulling things out of the brain bank, or are you just like walking around looking for inspiration? Like, where are you getting your creativity from?
It depends, actually, because it depends on what your aims are. I find with I Used to Be Famous, that one very much came out of. It was very organic the way it kind of came out, because at the time, I guess I was kind of trying to come up with new ideas in general. I'd already made one short film called Out of Body, but it was kind of, I think I was in post-production for that, so I was just quite creatively working. The brain was working creatively every day in the edit, and it, because of what was going on in in the press and the kind of zeitgeist of the time of these former pop stars. I think that's where it naturally came out. Whereas a few years later, I was sort of thinking, well, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket with this film. I need to have a kind of slate. So I kind of actively was like, right, looking at the industry, thinking, okay, where is there a space? What sort of genre is hot right now? All that kind of stuff. And I came up with another idea. Which ironically, but also not surprisingly, was the idea that kind of kicked everything off, which is kind of interesting. Well,
because I think it's quite a big bite to take when you're going for your feature film and going for like the musical genre, because I feel like you have to hit so many aspects of that film or that genre to make quite a successful film. Where I've seen so many other like first time filmmakers go more like the horror route, I guess, because you can get a lot of bang for your buck. For like on a really small budget. Obviously, working with Netflix, your budget is considerably larger than most feature film debuted filmmakers. But then, were you ever nervous at all, being like, okay, like it's a musical, like it's about well, I guess not really a musical, but
music film. I guess
it's a music film, yeah. Were you ever nervous that like, okay, like the music in this film obviously needs to be at a certain grade to be a part of the film?
It's a great question. I think for me, I've always just been obsessed with music films and the marriage of music in films, both sort of diegetically, and non-diegetically, sort of in the film itself, and music being played as a part of a kind of set piece. So like, some of the most iconic scenes of all time, like Scorsese's films, he's used like Rolling Stones quite a few times, Give Me Shelter, and Cameron Crowe films as well. Obviously his films tend to be a mixture of music films like Almost Famous, or his use of music in Jerry Maguire or Vanilla Sky. But those sort of directors, and like Linklater, Shane Meadows as well, where the music is such an important part of the film, whether it's the soundtrack or part of the story itself. So I just kind of naturally felt like that's the sort of film I wanted to make. John Carney films as well.
Because I think too, also because there are certain actors that I've seen out and around where obviously they can sing, like Lady Gaga, obviously now a singer, now being an actor. Was there any concern that you've I've landed Ed Skrein on the role, who's again for a feature film debut, landing Ed would be a massive get, so of course you'd want him in your film. But was there a point where you're like, fuck, I really hope Ed can sing, because otherwise this could sink my film?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, this is the thing. He learned to sing, and he learned to sing perfectly for that role, because I think we spoke about it every day. The idea of if Vince was the most amazing singer, and he turns up and he's I don't know, Luciano Pavarotti, it doesn't match up with the fact that he's just not really gone anywhere. I mean, a lot of former pop stars are amazing singers, and it hasn't worked out for them. But I think with Vince, the key for him was singing with heart, and obviously being able to hold a tune, but also the nature of the music, like the synth, and that kind of kitschness to the Tin Men. I think we were really keen on creating a kind of Jim Morrison, Ian Curtis way of kind of singing with total belief and heart, and it might not be traditionally the most amazing voice, but actually it makes total sense. The kind of talky singing thing. So actually, to be totally honest, I was never really nervous, because I always knew with the quality of Ed's voice that he would really be able to get it. It had such a lovely sort of gravel to it. Yeah.
I'm just picturing Nick Nolte now.
Right, he'd be great. He'd be amazing. He could play.
I used to be famous too.
Yeah, I really used to be famous many years ago. But I think Cogs Attorney, I'm going to have to write this. Yeah.
I've trademarked this as on camera.
Yeah, exactly. But no, yeah. So there was the main thing for us is actually when we met Ed was could he pull off the tonal duality of Vince being this sort of desperate, quite slightly delusional figure, and be really likable as well. And also the big brother kind of figure as well. Could we? That's when we met him, and that was the main focus. I think the singing was slightly a secondary thing, if I'm honest.
Yeah, because it's definitely a very hard tightrope to walk. Where obviously when you meet him, it's a bit of a loser. He's down on his luck. And then that scene that really sticks in my head is when he's dyeing his frosted tips in the mirror.
Right, yeah.
And then and then the reflection, you see the guy, his former bandmates on the TV talking about how embarrassing the haircut is.
Yeah.
That's so crushing, that scene.
Yeah.
So then, but at no point do you ever dislike this character. You're always in his corner. So it's because I know obviously you wrote this for a long time. How difficult was it to kind of try and find that line of making him a loser, but not too much of a loser, and making him a lovable person to get behind for the audience?
That was the biggest challenge, I think, and also going from short to feature, because I think in the short film, he's quite different. Vince, I think he's played brilliantly by Tom Bacon, who appears in the feature film. He gets into a fight with Ed Skrein on screen, which I always thought was quite funny. But
that's my role you took.
Right, yeah. In my head, I was thinking
method acting there.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no. So Tom played that role brilliantly, and we really, really went for hyper delusional, totally desperate. Didn't focus too much on him being that likable, because it was a 15-minute short film, and I think if the story is good enough and the character's interesting enough, your audience will stick with you for that length of time. Whereas for a feature film, it's really important to make that character a bit more relatable and a bit more likable. So he was a bit more tragic in a different way. You know, I think that he's delusional, but slightly less delusional. I think he kind of knows deep down that it's not going to happen, but he's just kind of going for it. Whereas Vince in the short film is like, this is absolutely going to happen, and I don't give a shit, you know, either way.
Was it difficult then adapting from the short film, because obviously the short film did so well, and you know, I feel like you'd be hesitant to maybe make too many changes, but obviously, you know, there's some adaptation between the short and the feature. So what was it like trying to pick the elements that you wanted to continue and the other elements that you wanted to kind of put by the wayside?
It was a big challenge. So I co-wrote the feature film. So I wrote the short film on my own, and then with the feature film, I teamed up with Zach Klein, my co-writer. He came on board with some brilliant ideas, and also he was first and foremost a writer. I think for me, I was first and foremost a director, and started writing after that. And it worked really well because having each other as sounding boards, and you know, and Zach's a very talented writer. I think that was our main focus, was how do we extend it. It felt like it was a story that needed to be told. It felt like it was, you get some short films where they are very contained, and they work brilliantly as a kind of contained piece. I think with ours, it was very always a concept for a feature film. There was always more to be told within that story, and certain things, you know, that's what we spent the years doing. We did like every draft, there'd be like quite big changes actually, until we hit the draft where it was like, okay, I think this is the sweet spot. And then it was sort of more kind of polishing. So things like Amber, you know, in the short film, she's actually his carer, played by Naomi Aki. And in the feature film, played brilliantly by Eleanor Matsuura, she's his mum. And there's quite a few reasons why we changed that, which I won't go into. But things like, you know, if it's his carer, then it opens up quite a lot of the narrative to, okay, well, where's his parents? You know, as an example. Whereas if it's his mum, then we can focus very much on mum-son dynamic. Stevie wanted to be more independent. Amber wanting him to reach his potential, but also being protective. And the brotherhood between Vince and Stevie. So yeah, you kind of focus on choosing certain things to expand, but not, being able to kind of contain it as well.
It's funny you bring up that dynamic, because like I think two of my favorite scenes from the film are not actually any of the musical scenes. Sorry,
hey,
but it's actually with Amber and also with Stevie, because the first scene, which it cracks me up to no degree, is when Ed comes to the house, and obviously Amber doesn't want him there, and then Stevie's like, no, I've invited him, and he does this line delivery which just cracks me every time, where just out of the corner of his eye he's like, and biscuits. And like literally I've watched it so many times now, and it still gets me every single time.
Excellent.
Like when you were shooting with that, like how much sort of like creativity and freedom do you give them to kind of like give different versions of line readings and like play around with the scene?
I like to give the actors as much as possible. I like to workshop as much as possible, because as I say, you know, authenticity and truthfulness is everything to me. So if a line is in workshopping, if a line isn't being said as naturally as it possibly could be, I will always prefer the actor to say it in the way that they would prefer to say it, you know, that would feel more natural to the character. And that goes for improvisation, and it goes for little bits and bobs. And, you know, the timing of Biscuits was, you know, Leo's got perfect comic timing.
Yeah,
you know.
It was perfect. And even just like the side eye out the corner, it cracks me up to no degree. And then the second scene, which I think, because when you're first introduced to the mum character, you know, my first assumption is that, okay, she's just going to be the wet blanket throughout the entire film. Like she's going to be the, you know, like the antithesis to what Vince wants to do.
Yeah.
And it's not until we get to that scene where, after, spoiler alert, the film's been out for a year, we can spoil this part, when Vince obviously gets into the fight, and then he comes back to their house to try and talk to her again.
Yeah.
And then she pulls him outside, and then she's like, look, you know, I don't want to hurt my son, you know, he needs stability. And you really see Amber as like this kind of like this like tiger in the corner of her son that's just there to protect him. And it's such a powerful scene. And were you worried at all that, you know, obviously it's like I feel like that character, like that's like the linchpin to that character, that scene, where you understand what she's about and you understand, you know, like who she cares about. Was it difficult at all filming that scene?
Yeah, we were kind of on. They really went at it.
Yeah.
and we were on the side of, you know, cancel state at night. Everyone's luckily quite understanding. But I mean, there's a version of that scene where Vince actually elbows the window and the window smashes. But in post, we were so amazed by their performance, Eleanor and Ed's performance together there, that it didn't feel necessary. It was strong enough, you know, without the kind of, you know, I don't know, it just felt like it just wasn't really needed. But yeah, that was interesting. I mean, we worked, that, as I say, like workshopping for me is really important. We, because it was during COVID, we managed to get Eleanor, because she was shooting The Walking Dead, and AMC very kindly allowed us to have Eleanor for a month. So we didn't have that much time. Like Eleanor says, like it's probably the least she was able to prepare for a role, and she managed to pull off the most amazing performance where it's very multifaceted. As you say, a lot of the time with these kind of roles, and in the past, we wanted to kind of make sure that there was real complexity there with the mother-son relationship and the mother of a son that's autistic. She did her research speaking to Leo's mum, and also Saul, my cousin, who Stevie's like loosely kind of based on, but very much inspired by. So yeah, I think to answer your question, the scene was. I remember it was the end of the day, and I was like, I know we're running out of time, but they're so hot right now in terms of where they're at in their performance. They both really built up to this point of emotion and anger and pain. So yeah, it was difficult, but I think we got it.
No, absolutely. I think one of the other scenes that stands out for me, and I look for the guy in the credits, is the guy that's like the drum circle teacher.
Oh yeah.
The guy's in it maybe like a couple of scenes, but he absolutely kills it in every single scene that he's in.
Yeah.
Where the hell did you find that guy?
So Kurt is a brilliant actor, Kurt Iguawan. He's it's interesting. So in the short film, that character is played by the person it's based on. So Dia Gomes. He is a drum teacher, and he was just so, you know, incandescent on the screen for the short film. He's a non-actor, and I just wanted to kind of get the essence of him for the short. But again, for the feature film, we felt that we needed to get a professional actor.
I think it's that scene where, you know, he's like talk to the, you know, like feel it through the drums and whatnot, where like you start to see like that seed of like truth that, you know, Vince comes to realize where, you know, he is good enough and, you know, he can do this, and it all starts from that original scene. It's absolutely solid. There was also that I know you alluded to it earlier, but with Saul, like, have you managed to sit down and watch the film with him, and like what's his response been to this?
So there was a special screening specifically for Saul that was amazing. It was, you know, I mean, I was nervous the whole way through.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, tough audience.
Yeah, and I could see him just sort of literally the whole film. He was sat forward watching it, and I was like, "Is he thinking this is so terrible?" I'm just kind of amazed with how terrible this is. But luckily, it was the opposite. And yeah, by the end of it, he just sort of turned to me and just gave me a massive thumbs up and a big grin. It meant a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have meant the world to you. Yeah, absolutely. Is it bizarre now, like having like looking back from like a year on, because, you know, like I've been stalking your Instagram and I've seen, you know, because it's been about the 1 year anniversary now, and is it strange to see like a film that you've worked on being like advertised on like the big screenwriting? Because like I saw there's like the big advertisement right near Tottenham Court Station. Yeah,
Tottenham Court Road. Now that I'm totally used to it, I'm a total diva. I expect it with every single film. No, it's still mind-blowing. You know, we'd spent so long trying to get this film made, and to make it in a small way that was very affordable for, you know, director, producer, writers that didn't have a feature film track record. And then we were very, very lucky, you know, to have been given the opportunity by Netflix and Fiona Lamptey, who commissioned the film. And then obviously when it came out, it was a total whirlwind. I mean, partly because my wife gave birth to our second child the week before we delivered the film. 2 big deliveries. Obviously, the child's much more important. However,
just had to slip that in there.
Yes. But so it was kind of mad because there was like having a really small baby at home, as well as a 3-year-old, and then all of this stuff was happening, you know, this very, very foreign thing that you've dreamt of. And seeing it there was, I actually don't think it really sunk in. It's sunk in now. I think I've kind of come up for air now, finally. It was amazing. I think the key was to have been. It's not like we suddenly were like, right, let's just make a totally different film because we have a budget for it. It's let's keep the
Is
essence.
Leonardo DiCaprio available for this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but no, it was let's keep the film that we want to make and make sure it's true. But the choices that I actually never thought I'd be able to have, I was suddenly able to have them. Like, for example, the soundtrack. I mean, I've dreamt of having those songs in there for years, and then it was like actually having that as an option, and and having. Obviously, there's a couple of scenes where you could bring the toys out, which I'm not going to say no to. And neither is my DOP, Angus Hudson.
You've got some big songs in there, like you've got like the Doy Brothers and whatnot. And
Yes.
I'm like, I don't want to know how much it costs to like get the royalties to that for
Yeah.
the movie. Like that must be like a good chunk of the budget right there.
Yeah, Doobie Brothers. We're allowed to use House of the Rising Sun, our own synth version. I mean, and current musicians, Arlo Parks and London Grammar, who worked very closely with us on the soundtrack and making the music for the band in the film. Dan Rothman and Hannah Reid, Maisie. Yeah, very lucky.
So then, going back to the beginning now, because this is completely out of order. But when you were writing it, right? Because I've heard you speak about how you'd basically turn up to like Starbucks or wherever like 2-3 hours before your day job, and then try and get some writing in. Like for this period that you were doing this, like were you just thinking, or even like the Starbucks staff, they're like, oh, it's that fucking guy again. Like he's gonna sit here and have like one cup of tea and milk it for 3 hours.
Yes.
But like going back, like would you do it all over again? Like is that like the way that you'd want to continue writing, getting up at like 6 a.m. to try and squeeze those hours in, or is your life a bit more relaxed now, being able to write at a bit more of the comfortable hours of the day?
It's definitely not more relaxed because I now have 2 children, so it's actually harder in a different way, and glorious as well. But would I do it again? I think I think absolutely, because I dreaming about making that feature film and being able to get it done and being happy with what you've made. Like naturally you look back a year later and you're like, I might have tweaked that and that, but actually I think that was the key, getting to a point where it's like when it came out thinking, okay, this is the best version of this. I've given it my all, and I think that's the key. In terms of whatever it took to get there, and that route to get to that point, I don't regret at all. But also I'm a morning person as well when it comes to creativity.
No, I've noticed through your Instagram responses.
Yeah, it's always at a certain time of the morning.
6 a.m.
Yeah,
Thanks for the wake up.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I get quite a lot of stuff done, in the morning time, and then I'm kind of useless at night. Yeah.
So then, what's it like pitching to Netflix? Like, I couldn't imagine, like, because obviously, you could go to any corner of the globe and everyone knows the name Netflix. Everyone's got Netflix on their TV. So, in some, like, does it feel like you're walking into Mecca almost, and you're kind of like, not that they're the only game in town, but obviously they are one of the biggest ones in town.
So I actually pitched it on Zoom because it was during COVID, and Fiona Lamptey, who commissioned the film, we had actually met the year prior talking about projects. So it was more of a kind of conversation pitch. And actually it was about this second film, really. That was the main one that I was pitching and chatting about. And then I was like, while we're here, I have this ready-made thing to go called I Used to Be Famous. She took a look at it, and then I got a call from my agent like a week later. And it was like, hold on to your butts. Netflix want both films, which was kind of mind-blowing. But pitching, it was fine. Also, I've spent quite a lot of time in like the branded and commercial kind of world, so pitching, I've done quite a lot of that for clients, whereas being able to pitch something that is like I'm kind of the client in a way, like it's for me, so it was just even easier.
No, like I think like at the end of the day, when you finish for the finished product, or at least in my defense, like when I watch something that I've done, I can't help but like look at all like the tiny things where I'm just like, oh, I wish I'd fixed that. I wish I'd changed that a little bit, or I wish I'd just like fix that a little bit.
Do you have that about my film as well?
Strap in, here we go.
Tell me.
I have some notes.
Tear it apart. Go, yeah.
No, I won't do that. But now, obviously, very well received, done very well on Netflix. Do you find that it's like opened up some more doors now? And because like through my research, it seems like it was a Herculean effort to get this first film across the line, and to even get it landed with Netflix and whatnot. So then now that you've got one in the bag, is it a lot easier going forward to get a second and third and fourth film going?
Second, third, fourth film sounds great. One after another. It's definitely a different. It's a different kind of proposition in terms of getting a film made, for sure, because you've got a track record now, and it's a massive learning experience as well. Having a film come out and then all eyes are kind of on you for a period of time, and then very quickly on to the next thing. But it's been really interesting because suddenly wanting a yes, just one person to say yes for so many years, you start getting sent scripts, which I'm very grateful for, and then actually it sounds weird, but it's a total change to your mentality when actually, without wanting to sound like an absolute dick, the power of no is actually more important, because if you do the first thing that comes along, you might not get to make a third film if it's wrong.
You got to wait for the right project to come
You got to wait for the right project and make sure not necessarily the project's a bad project, but it's just like whether you're right for it, and naturally if you're going to serve the project, and it will serve you as well as possible. So I've got my own projects, and then there's projects that I have I've that are already written that I'm now attached to, which is great. But yeah, it's I think it's always whether you made loads and loads and loads of films or not many at all, it's always going to be hard in different ways to get it made. To get that finance is always difficult, I think.
So now that you're getting, you're at that stage where you're like a proven commodity, and you're good at what you do, or at least I think so.
Thanks.
But so in terms of like the scripts that you're getting sent, like, is it like still in the musical genre, or are you getting pitched like Black Panther 3 now? Like, where are you at?
No, definitely there are a few sort of music films, dramas, a couple of rom-coms, but I'm like a massive film geek, so obviously I love I've got a couple of projects that are music films for sure, but one is actually a music thriller. One is a kind of music drama, but I'm also there's a musical actually which I'm quite excited about, but I'm also keen, and a comedy, but I'm keen to be doing like horror. I'm a massive horror fan, believe it or not. You might not be able to tell by watching I Used to Be Famous. I'd love to do a horror film. I'd love to, explore sci-fi. I don't know. I kind of look at directors in terms of like the music film directors that I love. Well, they do other things, but in terms of specifically those films they've done and how they use music, people like Linklater and Cameron Crowe, and obviously Tarantino. I admire people like Danny Boyle and Stanley Kubrick in that they went to different genres. I mean, Stanley Kubrick went to different genres of film and like made the best film in each of those genres. 2001's best sci-fi ever, Shining, arguably the best horror. Barry Lyndon. I could go on, but I would like to be that kind of director. Where you kind of go to different genres and just have your voice on each different kind of film in each different genre.
So then, outside of like, I know you've got a few musical projects coming up. Like, outside of that, is there like, do you have like, are you writing horror films? Are you writing sci-fis? Are you writing your own erotic thriller? Like,
erotic thriller, absolutely. No. So I have the one that I wrote, that I've written, that we're trying to put together is music thriller. It's it's I can't say too much about it, but it's definitely got darker kind of vibes than Famous, but music is at the heart of it as well. It's got kind of like Whiplashy, Nightcrawler, mixed with a bit of Black Swan.
Jesus, that is a hell of a mix right there.
And American Animals. Yeah, those are the kind of references. So if anyone wants to fund that one, yeah.
When you're gearing up then to make a film, are you just like going deep into like films and musicals to try and like get inspiration and?
Absolutely. When young filmmakers ask me for advice, that's one of the main things I say is like, remind yourself why you love film, and if you watch your favorite films, no matter what genre, even if you're making something totally like I remember watching like Goodfellas is one of my favorite films. I remember watching that whilst I was making Famous. Very different films, but in terms of that's
I don't remember Vince pistol whipping anyone.
Do you remember when he's like, how am I funny? What the fuck is funny about me? All my life I wanted to be a pop star. I think, and also like when we were making it, you know, Ed Skrein, he's a massive film buff as well, and we would be chatting about it, and Leo and Eleanor. I think you need to be constantly feeding your creative, you know, obsession and I think that was another thing. Yeah, just reminding yourself why you love film, not getting too lost, and focusing back in, because you can kind of get lost in the weeds a bit. You know, you get 1,000 decisions a day as a director. So, you know, there's an element of kind of overthinking and not trusting your instinct. I think the instinct is actually what drives everything, and you should always trust your instinct and your gut. And I think for me, what helps with that is listening to the music that I've always loved, that's inspired me with ideas and creativity, and all the films that I've kind of been inspired by as well.
So, like, I know with like the films that you've done and whatnot, like including the short films and the feature films, obviously, you know, you're driven by such passion and music. Do you find that when you're like watching other films, like for example, I was at an interview with Edgar Wright the other week.
Oh, cool.
When he was doing a promotion for Last Night in Soho. And, you know, again, like one of the questions that you get asked a lot is, you know, like what advice would you give to, you know, aspiring young filmmakers? And, you know, like I've seen a lot of interviews with a lot of directors, and, you know, they all kind of give something along the same lines of what you've just said, which is, you know, like obviously more power to you. Like,
so I'm not very original.
no.
Okay,
there's always like a golden nugget in everything that he says. But the one thing that Edgar said, which I found quite interesting, was that he was like, watch shit films. Because if you watch shit films, it'll inspire you to do something better.
Right.
And I thought that was quite an interesting way to pitch, you know, creativity to someone, because I can understand, obviously, you know, like trying to draw from the best when you're making something great. But then there's also the flip side of, you know, that is terrible. I can do so much better.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. I mean, for me, maybe where he's at in his career, I mean, I don't know, who's he advising? Is he advising young filmmakers, or is he saying that's what he does constantly and like now?
It was to an audience at the BFA.
Okay, so yeah, because interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I personally, what would be more helpful for me is seeing how to do things better, and then I can aspire to do that. But yeah, I guess it is. I mean, I think starting out, I think that is actually quite helpful as well to identify. Because I remember when I made my first off the record short thing. Which no one's ever going to see. I remember at the time thinking like, this is amazing, you know. And then obviously now looking back, it's like it's one of the worst things that's ever been created. And I guess that's what he's kind of tapping into, is like it's harder to identify that when you haven't had the 10,000 hours, I guess. I mean, everyone's always still learning. But yeah, that's it's an interesting piece of advice. I think for me, it's immersing yourself in stuff that is high quality, but also remind the stuff that you always love. I think you need to make sure you keep watching that stuff.
Like you touched on it earlier before with like Whiplash and Nightcrawler, because, you know, when I think of, you know, music films and, you know, the last 5 to 10 years that really stick out, obviously I used to be famous, but then also like Whiplash is definitely up there too. And, you know, I feel like they're at almost opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of, you know, storytelling in the music world. But they both share that kind of that core belief in passion and being driven and whatnot. So like when you're watching these films, are you like constantly like, do you find it hard to turn off that filmmaker side of your brain and like just watch a film, or are you kind of just like always like dissecting like, oh, like that's like an A shot, B shot, like a multicam, or
right?
Like,
yeah
because like having been to film school myself, I find it so hard sometimes to shut off that side of my brain and be like, oh, like that's some terrible green screen right there, or like, oh, I can tell the continuity's like stopped there, or they've had to like fudge that there.
Yeah
And it drives me nuts sometimes, where I wish I couldn't notice it.
Yeah, it's you know what, I thought I wouldn't be able to switch it off, and I've learned that actually you can, if the storytelling is like strong enough. I find that I become a lot more aware of stuff, where it's a bit like a referee in a football match, which I know you're not gonna enjoy this reference.
Not in a what match?
You know, the best referees are the ones you don't notice are there, you know, and it's when there's something controversial that happens or whatever, that they all eyes on them. Happened the other day with VAR with Spurs and Liverpool.
Actually, I did see that in the
news. You saw it, right? And that's what I'm saying. It's like actually the best VAR is the stuff where it's like, okay, cool, yeah, job done, kind of thing. And obviously you get auteurs and filmmaking where you can appreciate it, but I think when you can start to notice stuff like angles and cameras and all that stuff, in a way that's distracting you from the story and you don't want it to happen. I find it's because the storytelling is kind of lacking a little bit, and a lot of it goes the other way, which is like you can be aware of that stuff and appreciate, okay, that's how they did that, and they shot. I mean, I watched a Scorsese thing the other day.
You're the best
another
friend
of mine.
Yeah.
And he talks about the scene in Goodfellas where Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta, that famous scene, the "Why Am I Funny" scene, "How Am I Funny?" Sorry, and he talks about they shot it in an hour and a half at the end of a day. They squeezed it in, and it was just 2 angles, 2 medium wide shots, which I'd never noticed before, because I was just so taken away with it, and it's one of the most iconic scenes in cinema, and it's actually wide because he wanted to see medium wide. He wanted to see the body language of everyone around them change as it got more serious, kind of thing. And then that cathartic kind of moment where he's like, I'm just fucking with you, kind of thing. And I think now as a filmmaker, now that he said it, I can obviously notice it and appreciate it. But I know every time I watch Goodfellas, that's not really what I'm thinking. I'm going to be so immersed in what the characters are doing.
Well, it's quite funny. I went and saw Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers at the Royal Albert Hall the other week.
Never heard of it.
And I think it has to be up there in one of the films that I've probably seen the most amount of times.
Yeah, same. I did my dissertation on Lord of the Rings.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, we'll follow up with that.
Yeah, that's the next one. Yeah.
But because I've seen it so many times, and I've watched all the behind the scenes, and I've seen all the interviews, and I feel like it's probably the single most well-known piece of movie trivia in when the Two Towers, when Aragorn kicks the helmet and then he screams, and then like Chris, my partner, who I've also seen it probably about 20 times as well. Like, that's the scene where he breaks his toe.
Yeah.
Like, shut the fuck up.
Are you one of those people that like?
I'm absolutely. I would. Yeah.
Quote along. Yeah, I'm the same. I'm exactly the same.
And then because like she'll like lean up to me and just be like, "This is the scene." Potato.
Boiler mash of sick. I'm not gonna go for that. Don't tempt me, Frodo. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, yeah.
So it's quite hard, I think, at that point, because like literally it was probably about the 20th time I've watched it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is the scene where this happens, and this is the scene where this happens. But even for like films that are great, like Goodfellas and with Lord of the Rings, like I can still on the 20th rewatch find things that I really enjoy about it, and things that I haven't noticed before in the previous time that I've watched it.
Yeah, same. I think I find Coen Brothers films. I think Big Lebowski. I remember my dad mentioned, like, we've seen that film so many times. And there's a bit where the guys come and piss on his rug, and he shuts the door, and he puts a chair under the handle, right, because he knows they're coming. And then they just open the door backwards, and then the chair, and it's like, I remember my dad saying to me, like, he'd never noticed that before, but the second time he saw it, it was like the funniest thing he's ever seen. And yeah, I always remember, like, I was like, oh yeah, that the door does go the other way, kind of thing. But yeah, I think certain filmmakers, you just see things, over and over again, and new things each time.
Well, it's interesting because I find like a lot of my favorite films are films which I didn't quite enjoy the first time I watched them. Like one of my favorite films is Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. And the first time I watched that film, I thought it was the most boring thing I've ever watched. Like, granted, I watched it when I was about 14. Yeah. Maybe not quite the target audience. Right. But then as I got older, and and especially once I started dating, then I started to look at it in a new light, and you start to sympathize with like this Scarlett Johansson character, and then now that like I'm 10 years into my relationship, getting married next year,
you hate it.
Yeah, I'm back to hating it again. Yeah. But I'm starting to sympathize with the Bill Murray character now, and it's interesting how like so many times that if you rewatch something, it's like I know Tarantino, again, your best friend. Yeah. I was watching this thing where he was breaking down like his top 20 films since 1994, I think it was. Right. And one of the films that he talks about is Dazed and Confused.
I love that film. Yeah.
And he talks about how basically rewatching that film for him is like catching up with old friends.
Yes. Yeah.
So like, I find it like certain films just have that knack to like grow on you over time, but obviously you have to like give them that rewatch and give them their due.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many films that is the kind of, I mean, my brother inspired me quite a lot growing up, and it was always kind of, he'd watch film, and I remember Swingers we watched. In fact, for his 40th birthday, he rented out a cinema and put Swingers on. It's an amazing film. it's interesting actually now in this day and age how it kind of there's a few dated things in it, but it is amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine a few things have gotten dated.
Yes, like but I think look, I'm hoping I Used to Be Famous has that for some people. You know, I've had such an amazing messages from all over the world, which is, you know, the whole Netflix of it all, like having access to that many people to see this film, which is ultimately the main thing. You just want people to see the film that you've made and it to kind of make some kind of, without sounding cheesy, like make some kind of positive impact on their life, no matter how small or big. I'm hoping it's that kind of film for people. People can always revisit it, you know?
Well, so then now a year on, obviously, you know, a long time has passed. It's been out there for a while. A lot of people have watched it. Like, what's the response been now, like over the course of the year? Like has there been? I can't imagine many people are messaging you being like, "It was shit. I hated it." I imagine people are reaching out with messages of positivity.
It's mainly my family members just abusing me, telling me it's crap. No, the response has been amazing. Honestly, I couldn't have both in terms of just people enjoying the film and sending messages, but also in terms of the autism world, you know, and working with Leo and the representation of autism. You know, that's probably the main thing actually is on the whole people seem to be very, very happy about that, which we can't thank, you know, the National Autistic Society enough, because, you know, we thought it was very important, essential to be working with them on it, which we had been for a few years on the script, and on the edit as well. They saw a few things there, and access all areas as well. It's been amazing. It's been amazing. There's obviously, I mean, having not made a film that up to that point where you're suddenly open to, like, you know, Twitter and YouTube comments and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, am I gonna take a look? And I couldn't help myself, and I did, and I was like, how am I gonna react to it? And it's like, to be honest, there's always the overwhelming majority has been amazing, really, thankfully. There's obviously, like, every now and then there'll be someone that just didn't get it and didn't like it. Some of them like say so in a very amusing way, but the fact of the matter is you're so happy that you made your film, and as I was saying before, I'm so happy with with the final product that, you know, I don't really care. Like, if someone had, that's fine. Like, if that, you know, I was happy with how, like, I wasn't that sensitive about it. I say that now, but my next one I'm going to be crying.
Don't you dare say anything bad.
Yeah. Please don't send bad comments to it. Yeah.
But I feel like if you go out trying to make a film for, like, as wide a audience as possible, you know, you obviously, you know, you water it down, it becomes bland. I feel like, you know, not to, you know, set out and be something, you know, quite divisive, but, you know, I feel like if you make a film that everyone enjoys, that's going to be the most boring film in the world. Like, so, you know, you need to kind of, like, cut a path and to make films for yourself, and obviously, you know, stand your ground and be like, okay, like, this is my story. This is the story that I'm going to tell.
Yes, yeah. Studios would disagree with you though. If there's a film that everyone enjoys, they'll be very happy with that. So
when you're, like, writing, right? Because I remember when I first started working in the film industry, one of the first things I did was I got I was like the runner on a small Australian TV show called Packed to the Rafters, and one of the best things that I ever got to, like, teach me writing was one of the producers came along, basically gave me, like, 24 scripts, which was the entire season, and she was like, read all the scripts and, you know, it was like 24 episodes, 24 scripts, and you realize, you know, the difference between good and bad writing, because I'm surprised where, you know, you can find writing which is just not terrible, but like not great, but then the actor can bring themselves to it and, you know, elevate it to that next level,
right,
where, you know, when you've got a screen, like a page that's obviously, like, so well written, and it's like, it's hard to fuck this up. So, like, how do you develop your style of writing? Like, is this something that you've just persevered with over time, or you know, like, is it just been a lot of trial and error, or, you know?
I think with writing is an interesting one. My relationship with writing is quite different to directing. Directing is what I always wanted to do. So every kind of problem, or, you know, creative problem, practical problem, I'm excited about the creative solution to it. Whereas with writing, it's a lot more, I mean, I go through an existential crisis almost daily when I'm writing, and it's incredibly cathartic when you hand it off and it's done, and I enjoy that part. But actually the process of writing, I I have a lot more self-doubt. I think that's it. There's the confidence with directing because there's enjoyment and confidence. I think with writing, always self-doubt, and I think that's quite common with writers actually, from what I've learned. So yeah, I'm. It's an interesting one because now, you know, being attached to scripts that are already written, and then you kind of do your director's draft and interpret it, and I'm kind of enjoying that. It's like I've not done that before until now, but I'm also enjoying kind of writing. I love the idea of having a career. I aspire to having a career like Jon Favreau or someone where, like, I mean, obviously, you know, making massive films would be something anyone aspires to, but specifically, you know, he will make his big films and that he's not written and put his directorial vision on it, and voice, but then he'll make Chef, you know, which is obviously his passion project. Every few years he'll do something like that. That's something that I'd love to aspire to, you know.
No, like it's interesting because you can kind of draw the parallels between Iron Man 1 and Mandalorian, and then, you know, it's like, you know, I think he's been doing the Book of Boba Fett as well.
Right. Okay. I
Like,
don't know. Yeah.
Like it's quite interesting when you find someone that, you know, like obviously on one side you've got like your Tarantinos and your David Lynches who, you know, or like your Noah Baumbach kind of thing where, you know, like they write and they've got their feature film and like that's their style and that's who they are. But then you've also got other directors like, you know, Steven Spielberg and Eddie Sternberg who, like, you know, like
yeah, right next to yeah
That's right up there in the pantheon.
yeah.
But like, you know, you can write obviously, but then also, you know, you can bring someone else in who like does the writing for you, and then like I imagine it must be difficult to basically kind of continue going up that hill trying to write a project for yourself as opposed to just being like, look, here's a finished project, here's a script, like take it and do what you can.
It's really, really interesting how different it is. You know, you can put all your energy into something that's already kind of there, whereas when you're doing your own script, it's sort of the next draft of like a very long journey of pain and, you know, and glory at the same time. You know, it's actually a much more complex relationship, I find. So as I say, I think having my own passion projects without massive deadlines and being able to do that very organically, you know, is probably what I'd like to do in terms of writing my own stuff. And then when it's ready, it's ready. And it doesn't have that pressure on the writing so much. Pressure on the directing is fine. Pressure on the writing is where I kind of get a bit kind of, let's say, stressed. But whereas when something's already there, it's a pleasure to kind of like, you know, obviously if I'm the right person for it and I can kind of see how I can put, if my voice is complementary to that script. And luckily enough, you know, there's a couple of projects I'm attached to now, which we're in that position, and I'm quite excited about.
So I know that you've got like, you know, a couple of projects that are in various stages of development. Are you still like now like coming up with ideas and still writing, or are you kind of like putting that in the back burner while you kind of focus on what you've got on your plate at the moment?
It's a great question. I think there's always something bubbling away. Always, you know. I watched a film the other day. I watched Barbarian the other day.
Oh, with Justin Long?
Yeah, yeah, which really inspired me, actually. I was just like, it's such a great premise, and, you know, I really enjoyed it, and that, you know, really focused my eyes on kind of like, I could really do with coming up with like a kind of a horror. Or, you know, I go and speak to my agent, or I speak to the, you know, colleague or producers I'm working with, and just be like, have you got any interesting horrors? Because I'm kind of digging that right now, you know. So I think I'm constantly thinking. And then obviously when you're more busy and you're working specifically on a project, all your focus goes into that, and then it's the nature of it, you know. You kind of hand that off, and then constantly think about something else.
So you've been developing I Used to Be Famous over many years, and obviously in that time you've become a father of 2 kids. How does being a father kind of, like, has it changed your perspective on the film I Used to Be Famous, or has it not changed it at all?
The main thing that changes is your total and utter lack of time to be creative. No, I mean, becoming a father changes you entirely. I've found anyway. I think you become a lot more empathetic to everyone else, you know, in the world, I think. And I think that's a very helpful tool. Empathy is a very helpful tool. Not that I lacked empathy before. I was just like total psychopath. Like, but yeah, I think being able to empathize more with to a much higher degree, I think that's the main change, and I think that's been really helpful for me, you know, because then when we're, you know, working with actors on their characters, you know, and you're delving into what is it that they're feeling, you know, even if it's an antagonist, really understanding and empathizing with what is it they're feeling, it just means that you can get to that truth, you know, of the characters, I think. So yeah, that's definitely helped, I think.
Yeah, I always hear about actors talking about this, trying to find like a kernel of truth to the character, because you know, I can't imagine Robert Downey Jr. trying to be like method and be like, all right, I'm a fucking billionaire, I've got rockets coming out my hands, like I'm a god to these people. So like, you know, I imagine you have to find some sort of truth to like the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I think every character, whether you're Iron Man or whether you're, you know, any of Christian Bale's characters who are just like amazing, you know. Not that Iron Man's not amazing, but like, you know, fantastical or very grounded. Every single one of them has recognizable human emotions, even if you're not a human. You know, I think that's the key. Is there's films with universal themes in, you know, films that are entirely like not universal experiences, but like what those characters are going through, your audience need to relate to in some way and understand. And again, they don't need to relate to it. You could be watching American Psycho, you know, right?
When you said Christian Bale, that was exactly what I was thinking of.
You could be, you could be watching that, and you don't need to like relate in a way where it's like, oh yeah, I understand why he's murdering these people.
Yeah. Who hasn't killed a person? For the
yeah. So I was just going to do some quotes from American Psycho, but I'm not going to. I'm definitely
the uncut version of this
definitely
interview.
not going to do some quotes from there. But you can as an audience member identify why he is feeling that in a strong way, and I think that's the key. That's what I'm kind of constantly working on with my characters, and you know.
So then, who do you go to then? Because I imagine, like with any project that anyone takes on, it's hard to kind of keep that objectivity, because you know when you're, especially with I Used to Be Famous, because you know, like this like the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years that you were developing it, like it must be so hard.
45 years. yeah.
It must be difficult to kind of keep that level of objectivity, and obviously throughout all the rewrites that you've gone through, to make sure that you're still hitting the points that like, okay, like the audience still needs to empathize with this character, and I still need to make sure that this person comes across as a human on screen. Like, how do you keep like that level of like do you have like people that you go to being like, okay, like, can you read this? Like, how do you get those fresh eyes on something that you're putting together like that?
I think collaboration is key. Fresh eyes is, as you say, is like fresh eyes are absolutely really important for different reasons. People with different perspectives. Leo, you know, is autistic, so he will have a perspective that I'm not able to give on that character, and a lived experience, which will be really helpful. You know, the research that Ed and Eleanor will have done for their characters and their interpretation on it will be really valuable as well. And you know, I always find that there's so many incredible creatives working on this film, and they all have their own departments, they all have their own scenes that they're focusing on at that time, and they'll all have different ideas to you. And for me, no idea is a bad idea. You just don't have to take them all on. And it's your job as a director to make sure that everyone, every runner I work on now is going to be like, right, this is what we should do.
Yeah.
But
I've got some ideas.
I've got some ideas. Take a seat. But actually, you know, like there might be something amazing there. And I think, you know, in that environment, I like to kind of create a place where everyone is confident. And I think if they feel valued, they feel confident and more creative. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So when you're obviously starting on short films, you know, like any other short film director, I imagine you'd be taking on more than just the directing role. You'd be, you know, maybe doing gaffing, focus pulling, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So when you're obviously, you know, working on a feature film, and you know you've actually got heads of department and people that you can rely on to do these jobs, do you find it difficult to kind of, in a way, relinquish control of these roles and to basically trust someone else to bring your vision to life?
Not at all. I like the opposite, because the stuff that I would do on my earlier stuff, you know, to be honest, I was actually really lucky with, I think the key is if you have a really great producer who can ensure that you can focus as much as possible on directing, and is able to kind of maximize the little budget that you have so that you can focus all your time in allowing the people that are better at those jobs. They're all going to be better than I am at the things that you mentioned, you know. So the key is is letting go of that stuff, but just making sure it's aligned with the vision. Having enough meetings in pre-production or in prep where there's no like surprises that don't need to happen. There'll always be surprises on the day, but like you have as much prep and workshopping with the actors. Goes the same with all your HODs, and everyone across. I think that's it. It's just to make sure you maximize their talent and ideas, but make sure it's in line with the vision, and then that way you've got everyone working at 100%. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. You touched on it before with working with was it the Autistic Society, National Autistic Society?
Yeah.
What was it like working with them on a set? Because I can imagine they bring a lot to the set, and they're only there to help bring your vision to life. But what was that kind of collaboration like with them?
So the National Autistic Society were very much focused mainly on the script. I think when we got to the set, we were working with Access All Areas. Access All Areas specialize in neurodivergent talent, whether it's cast or crew. So we were actually provided with an amazing acting coach specifically for Leo. Her name was Trisha Hitchcock. And we worked relentlessly together, Trisha, Leo, and I, from pre-production, from prep, way early in prep, to get to find his version of Stevie. And then on the set, when there were certain needs that Leo might have, certain breaks he might need to have, and if there was something that needed a bit more interpretation from me, like a direction, then he would talk it out with Trisha, and I would learn from Trisha and from him. So that was amazing. It was actually amazing. And I think, different actors have different processes. If you're working with any kind of talent, you adapt, and they adapt to the situation. So it was absolutely a pleasure and a joy to work with Leo and also the other neurodivergent talent, especially in the drum circle.
So you talked about just then, but with those meetings that led up to the production, right, with Trisha and Leo and yourself, was there anything that came out of that kind of surprised you or you weren't expecting?
I mean, I was surprised every day but in that his interpretation of the character, there'd be certain things where it would be very, very important that it was quite close to the script. And then, as I say, I liked allowing Leo and the other actors to kind of interpret it in their way. So I guess, it was a kind of natural daily kind of surprise in a way, because I wouldn't anticipate exactly how he would do it. He'd do it in a new way, which would be really, really interesting, and that's why I thought it was such a special performance.
I heard you talk about your research about this film as well, where you kind of went down the path of looking at old pop stars and where they've ended up and whatnot. And I imagine there's a broad spectrum of happy and not so happy stories. Like what did you get from that research? That was there anything that you thought were like, okay, like this is good, I need to kind of like bring this into the script, or was it all kind of just like good background knowledge just to have for the film?
I remember doing the research and coming across the most amazing multifaceted stories, from something being really, really funny to being really tragic. It's such an extreme thing for a human to go through at such a young age, to have all the success and adulation and then to be chewed up and spat out. And now especially I empathize so much with that, because suddenly I'm now empathetic because I've had children. But yeah, so it just felt like there were quite a lot of stuff that I learned, but there wasn't a specific person it was based on.
Now, I imagine that it has to be some of the toughest like things to live through, having so much fame and attention, and you got money, you got the girls, you got the fame, the paparazzi, everyone wants to be your best friend, and then I'm sure we can all think of at least 10 people that we know where it's like a slow decline into obscurity, and it's a tough way to go. And then obviously seeing you portray that with Ed on I Used to Be Famous is just it's heartbreaking, because we can all relate to it so well.
Yeah, I mean, Ed especially, he did so much research for it, and he's such a collaborative actor. As mentioned earlier, he gave it his all and learned to sing for the part, and he has quite a few contacts, because he had a career in the music industry in the past, and he was saying, there's so much mental health issues that people are going through now based on that experience back then, and a lot of it is based on luck, and and I think that's universal. I think that goes for success, having success, and an excess of success at a young age, and then things changing.
When you're writing something, right, and like obviously you want to patent it. Is patent the right word? When like you basically
copyright a script.
Yeah, you want to copyright it. Like at what point do you think, okay, like I've got something here, this is something that I want to get down officially, that this is my story?
I think as soon as it gets to a point where it's ready to send anywhere, like send to your agent, or I think how I kind of come up with new stuff, I'll chat it through with some like trusted kind of colleagues and friends and family, and work on it and get it to a point where I think it's solid enough, and then maybe mention it in meetings and send it to your agent, and then it becomes a bit more real. And then once it's like you've done a treatment or like a one pager, and I think it's at that point where you're ready to actually send it anywhere. That's when you kind of make it official.
And then when you started sending that script around, right, and pitching it, like obviously not everyone's going to be like, this is amazing, here's $10 million. Like,
it's a shame that I wish they were. Yeah.
Like, was there did Netflix give you any sort of feedback, being like, look, this is great, we want this, but can you just change this, like this and this?
Yeah, it's very rare that you don't have feedback. And Zach and I, after we were kind of commissioned to do that work, to kind of change certain bits and bobs and kind of go through another round of this and that, and and then it gets to a point where it's ready to greenlight, and even once it's greenlit, things will change because you workshop the script will change. You make your film, I'm sure you've heard the famous, you make the film 3 times, when you write it, when you shoot it, when you edit it, and another 10 times on top of that. There's always, the thing is, it's like, I don't think that it's a bad thing to like constantly be working on something, because you can always go back. There is overthinking things when it comes to quick decisions, but when you're writing, or when you're in post, not so much shooting, because of time, but when you're writing and in post, you can, push it as far as you need to push it, and keep tweaking if you're not feeling what you want to feel, because you can always go back.
Like, I find that must be one of the most difficult things when you're in post, because you've got the footage, you've got all the, like, everything's there for you to assemble. Basically, there's like no more adding to it in a way. And then at that point, you're cutting together your scenes, you're refining it, you're doing the soundtrack, you're doing all that sort of stuff. So then, at what point, like, because like there's no one there to tell you, okay, this is the finished product. At this point, it's done. So at what point do you decide for yourself, like, no more tweaking, this is it, like this is the whole thing?
I think sometimes it's difficult to ever do that. Like, you're constantly just like, oh god. Is it interesting? Because I remember I went to go and see West Side Story during post-production. I remember seeing, I was like,
the film or the show?
The film, and I was watching it, and there's a shot, this crane shot that Spielberg directed, and there was, I remember when we were in the edit for ours, there was this shot that was so perfect for everything, but there was like one tiny little bump and I was just so sensitive about that little bump, and everyone else is just like, no one's noticing it, it's great. It's just because most of the time, all the takes, were great, and camera crew were amazing, but every now and again, in a take, something that might not have been planned for might happen, but then the performances are so good, and you kind of do it, and then obviously you can kind of fix certain things. And this was the one thing where it was a point where it's like, it can be fixed to a point where I'm always going to be sensitive about this thing, but no one else can notice it. And I watched this film, and I remember this massive crane shot, and I noticed this massive like dip, which definitely wasn't supposed to be there in the final Spielberg film, so then I was like, oh, it's fine. It's fine for Spielberg to have little bumps, it's fine for me. Do you know what I mean?
It must be one of those things where once someone points it out to you, you can't help but not notice it.
Yeah.
But when you watch it, you can watch it 5 times and still not notice it.
Yeah. I think that I've learned a lot about that. I think it's the key is, like, if the scene's working, and you can't be overly sensitive if time's starting to run out. You can at the beginning of it, if as I say, you can always kind of go back and just you're supposed to just try everything and see if it can work with a different take take or whatever. But you've got to be pragmatic as well. You know, there was a couple of scenes in our film which they're not in there. You know, these like full scenes that there was an amazing scene at the graveyard between Ed Skrein and Lorraine Ashbourne, and it was all about you know, Vince's guilt, you know, from when his brother died. Spoiler. Okay. And both of them were absolutely stunning in the scene, and I was so excited when we shot it. But we got into the edit, and there was just something about it that didn't fit into the whole piece to have the scene in there. You know, if you have a certain amount of drama and dramatic scenes, the pacing can be really affected if there's too much. And yeah, we had to edit that scene and put it into this montage, which we felt was really strong, just to have the image of the two of them standing at the grave, and then later in the montage embracing. It actually felt stronger for the whole piece. So you have to kind of balance, you know, try everything, but also you need to be pragmatic, and you need to get to a point where you're like, I'm going to make peace with it. The other thing is we did a screening, test screening, which is really helpful because that's people that are totally unconnected to the film, disconnected from the film. And we got really, really great scores, luckily. You go through a whole, like, I was a nervous wreck, but it becomes quite clear once you show it to people what's working, what's not, what you need to worry about, what you don't really need to worry about.
So with the feedback from those screenings, because I only know from what, you know, I've seen other people talk about, where basically they just pull people off the street and they're like, hey, do you want to go see this film? Like, is that something like similar, where you're basically just showing it to complete strangers and then they just basically get a card and they're just like, right, like, what you think? Like,
yeah, but I think they do it in a way where, you know, you'd like to think the people that they choose from a range of demographics will take it seriously, and they seem to, you know, and really interesting how to read the scorecards, and you have people there, you know, watching it for different reasons than other people. Like for example, there are people in the audience that were autistic. They would definitely have an opinion on certain aspects of Stevie's performance and representation, and as well as, you know, the story in general. And there'll be people that are musicians, you know, and the representation of the music industry. So yeah, it was, we were delighted. We were really excited about the test screenings, and that luckily we didn't have to, like, there were changes that we made based on some of the feedback, but it wasn't like wholesale changes.
So with that scene right at the graveyard side, I know you just said that you could basically just cut it down to kind of like that, put it into that montage, and that montage, I have to say, it definitely sticks with me, because I feel like so much powerful storytelling gets across in such a short amount of time, and I think a big part of that is because of the music track that you've chosen,
right?
Which for the life of me I can't actually remember.
Nick Mulvey, Fever to the Form.
That's the one. Was that one of the songs that you've always had in your mind, or was that something that kind of came later in the process?
That came later, actually, because the montage was never, I don't think we ever really planned to have a montage there, but we were working with my editor, Julian Ulrichs, who's a fantastic editor. You know, we would battle it out on a daily basis to get the best out of the story, and to tell it in a way that, yeah, like, you do your first cut. The assembly cut, when you watch it, is always, like, absolutely horrific. And it would be weird if it isn't. Like, like, I hear other, I mean, I think Christopher Nolan, he speaks about it as just kind of like, you know, I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially it's like, if you don't die a little inside with the assembly cut, then something's wrong, because the assembly is literally just plonk it all together with a little bit of tweaking here and there. So from there to the final piece, you really do make a new film. It went from 3-hour assembly cut to an hour and 46.
Jesus, I would love to see the Lord of the Rings version.
The extended director's cut. Yeah, so there's so many things that, you know, I remember when we were shooting one of the scenes, and it was like a 7-minute scene, and it's like, we were shooting it, there's no way that this is all going to be in there, and the poor, you know, actors are like giving it their all with these lines, where it's like, I know that is going to have to come out, but sometimes you need to. I mean, I think with the next film, I'll definitely be a bit, with the experience, be more efficient with it. But yeah, it's that scene specifically with that song was really hard to find a song that did what we needed it to do, because it's quite down at the beginning with, you know, the drum circle, where's Vince, where's Stevie, and they're kind of missing each other, and then there's a kind of rise, and then it kind of crescendos, and then it's kind of quiet again at the end. And we went through a lot of things. I worked with Dan Rothman was looking at it. David Fish, who was our music supervisor, I was driving him mad with it, and we were all kind of sending each other different options and editing to different songs as well. And then that was the one song that seemed to do exactly what we needed to do. But for me, I've had this playlist. It's just called Filmmaker, and I've had it for years. And anything that feels cinematic in any way, I'll just put it onto that playlist. And that's quite a good kind of fast forward, because there tends to be something there. But then obviously, Spotify radio based on other stuff you like is pretty good too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And then just lastly before we go, is there anything that you want to plug, or tell the people what's been going on in the world of Eddie Sternberg?
So yeah, keep watching the film. That's the main thing.
Watch it again.
I'm in development on a few things that you'll hear about soon, hopefully. And yeah, maybe I'll come back and talk about that when it's done. But yeah, that's about it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time, Eddie. And I'll look forward to seeing what you do next.
Cheers, man. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Cheers. Thank you.